The fluorescent light in the third-floor bathroom had been flickering for 2 weeks, casting everything in a sickly strobe. Dalton Freeman stood in the doorway with his mop bucket, looking at the vomit splattered across the tile floor, the sink, and somehow the ceiling. Vice Principal Bryce Collingham stood 3 feet back, hand over his nose, his Brooks Brothers tie perfectly knotted. "Clean this up," Bryce said, not looking at Dalton. "The donor's reception starts in 20 minutes. Dalton set down his bucket and reached for the industrial cleaner. "I'll need the hazmat supplies from the main closet. This needs proper—" "Just use your hands and paper towels. God, do I have to explain everything? Are you too stupid to figure out basic cleaning?" The word landed like it always did, sharp and casual, a knife so familiar Dalton barely flinched anymore. He was 43 years old. He had been hearing variations of that word in these halls for 15 years. He cleaned the bathroom with the inadequate supplies. Bryce left without another word. 15 years. 15 years of Mrs. Hartley from the English department stepping over his mop bucket while discussing Faulkner with a colleague, saying loudly enough for him to hear, "Some people are meant for intellectual labor, others for physical labor. It's just natural aptitude." 15 years of students dropping trash at his feet instead of in bins 3 steps away, laughing as he bent to pick it up. 15 years of faculty meetings happening in rooms he'd just cleaned, where his presence was so irrelevant they discussed budget cuts to custodial services while he emptied their wastebaskets. 15 years of being called the janitor instead of his name, even though he wore a name tag, even though he'd been introduced dozens of times, even though he'd worked there longer than half the current faculty. At Whitmore Academy, service workers weren't quite invisible. They were visible enough to blame when something went wrong, invisible when it came time to acknowledge their humanity. Dalton finished the bathroom and pushed his cart toward the boiler room. It was 3:47 p.m. He had 13 minutes before he needed to set up chairs in the auditorium for tonight's event. 13 minutes to be someone other than the janitor. In the boiler room, wedged behind the industrial water heater where no one ever looked, he kept a milk crate covered with old rags. Inside, Introduction to Educational Leadership, 3rd edition, Organizational Psychology, The Ethical Principle. His laptop, 7 years old, held together with electrical tape. He opened the leadership textbook, found his place. The fluorescent light here was steadier than upstairs. He'd replaced the bulb himself last year with a better one, a small gift to his secret self. "Dad?" He jumped. Amara stood in the doorway, 19 years old and wearing her college sweatshirt, home for fall break. Her face held that expression he hated, the one that mixed love and pity and rage. "Baby, you're supposed to wait in the car." "I've been waiting in the car since I was 7. She came closer, saw the textbook. "Please, quit, please. I'll take extra shifts at the library. We'll figure it out." "Your tuition is covered by scholarship, you know that. Your housing, your books, your food." He closed the textbook carefully. "I can't afford to quit, and I can't afford to get fired for reading on the job. So I do this. They treat you like garbage. They treat me like I'm invisible. There's a difference." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Invisible means they don't see what I'm doing. Invisible keeps me safe." Amara's jaw tightened. She'd inherited that from him, the way anger made them go quiet and still. "You're worth 10 of them. I know that, you know that. Someday, baby, they'll know that too." She left, unconvinced. Dalton returned to his reading. 8 minutes left. Luther found him at 4:15 while Dalton was hauling folding chairs from the storage closet. Luther Sykes was 61, had been head custodian for 30 years, had trained Dalton on his first day. His face was a roadmap of disappointment survived. "Saw you with your books again," Luther said quietly, helping with the chairs. "Still at it?" "Almost done with my doctorate." Luther's hands stilled. "Your what?" "Educational leadership, defending my dissertation in December." "Jesus, Dalton," Luther's voice dropped to a whisper. "Hope is dangerous here. You know that. These people don't change. This place doesn't change. You think some degree is going to make them see you different?" "I'm not trying to make them see me different. I'm trying to be different." Luther shook his head, but his eyes were wet. "You're already different. You always were." They finished setting up in silence. At 5:30, the auditorium filled with faculty, students, and board members. Principal Richard Sutton, 72 and exhausted, took the podium. Dalton swept the back row, rhythmic and invisible. "After 35 years, Sutton said, I'm announcing my retirement, effective June." Polite applause. Bryce Collingham straightened in his seat, smoothing his tie. He'd been vice principal for 8 years, had family money, had a grandfather's portrait in the library. He was already mentally redecorating the principal's office. "The board will conduct a national search," Sutton continued. "We need transformational leadership. Enrollment is down 18%. We need someone who can bring Whitmore into the 21st century." More applause. Faculty checked phones. Students whispered. In the back row, Dalton's broom moved steadily across the floor, the sound lost beneath the murmur of conversation. No one looked at him. No one ever looked at him. That night, 300 miles away in a downtown office building, Dr. Patricia Langford sat at her desk reviewing applications for the Whitmore Academy principal position. She was 68, had served on the school board for 12 years, had spent her earlier career as a civil rights lawyer dismantling institutional discrimination brick by brick. She opened the next file. Her reading glasses slipped down her nose as she scanned the CV. Columbia University. Harvard Graduate School of Education, published research on educational equity, 15 years of administrative experience, stellar recommendations. The name at the top stopped her, Dr. Dalton Freeman, Ed.D. She leaned back in her chair and smiled. The faculty lounge smelled like burnt coffee and old paper. Gwen Hartley held court at the center table, her reading glasses dangling from a beaded chain as she gestured with a half-eaten scone. "We need someone who understands our culture," she said, "our traditions. Someone who won't come in swinging and destroy what makes Whitmore special." Around her, teachers nodded. Marcus Chen, calculus department, scrolled through LinkedIn on his phone. "Harvard Ed School has 3 candidates in administration. Any of them would kill for this." "I heard Choate's assistant head is interested," someone offered. "God, anyone but Bryce." This from Vanessa Okafor, standing near the window with her arms crossed. "He's been measuring the principal's office curtains for weeks." Laughter, but nervous. Bryce had money. Bryce had legacy. Bryce had already started acting like the decision was made. In the library's computer alcove, Dalton's hands shook as he attached his CV to the application portal. The cursor hovered over submit for 30 seconds. Around him, students crammed for midterms, oblivious. The clock above the circulation desk read 4:47 p.m. Deadline was 5. He clicked. The confirmation email arrived instantly. "Thank you for your interest in the principal position at Whitmore Academy. Applications will be reviewed by our search committee, and selected candidates will be contacted within 2 weeks." Dalton closed the browser, cleared the history, and logged out. His custodial cart waited by the reference section. He had 3 bathrooms to clean before his shift ended. Luther found him 2 days later in the boiler room, eating lunch on an overturned bucket. The older man's face was stormy. "You applied?" Not a question. Dalton set down his sandwich. "How'd you know?" "Janine in HR. She processes applications. Saw your name come through. Dalton, what are you thinking?" "I'm thinking I'm qualified." "Qualified?" Luther laughed, bitter. "You think that matters? You think they're going to hire the man who cleaned their toilets? They'll destroy you if they find out. Make an example. Make sure everyone knows their place." "Maybe my place isn't where they put me." "Your place is where they say it is. That's how this works. That's how it's always worked." Dalton stood, brushed crumbs from his uniform. Then maybe it's time it worked different. Upstairs, Bryce cornered board member Thomas Wendell near the parking lot. Wendell was 70, wealthy, barely involved except to approve budgets. Perfect target. "Tom, got a minute?" Bryce's smile was practiced. "I wanted to touch base about the search. I know the board values institutional knowledge, and I've been here 8 years as VP. I know every donor, every family, every tradition. I could hit the ground running." Wendell fumbled with his car keys. "Yes, well, the committee is reviewing all candidates." Of course. I just think continuity matters. Someone who understands what Whitmore means, not some outsider who'll come in and change everything." "The board asked for transformation, Bryce." "Right, but transformation within our values, our identity." He was sweating slightly. "My grandfather built the library. My family has given over $2 million to this school." Wendell's expression cooled. I'm aware of your family's generosity. The committee will be in touch. He got in his car. Bryce stood in the parking lot watching him drive away. The video interview was scheduled for 7 p.m. on a Thursday. Dalton took a personal day, drove to Amara's apartment 3 hours away, borrowed her ring light and laptop. She helped him set up, adjusting the camera angle, testing the sound. "You got this," she said, squeezing his shoulder. At 7 o'clock exactly, 6 faces appeared on screen. Dr. Langford in the center, flanked by board members he'd never met. They saw a man in a pressed shirt and tie, bookshelves behind him, confident and calm. "Dr. Freeman, thank you for joining us. Tell us about your vision for Whitmore Academy." Dalton leaned forward slightly. When he spoke, his voice was steady, clear, nothing like the quiet murmur faculty heard in hallways. "Whitmore claims to prepare students for leadership in a diverse world, but you can't teach values you don't practice. I've watched this institution for 15 years. I've seen brilliant students reduced to test scores, service workers treated as invisible, and a culture that confuses tradition with excellence. Transformation isn't about destroying what works. It's about having the courage to fix what doesn't." Board member Jennifer Sue unmuted. "Your research on institutional equity has been widely cited. How would you apply those principles here?" "Start with who we see, who we value, who gets a voice in decision-making. Real change doesn't come from mission statements. It comes from examining every policy, every practice, every casual interaction, and asking, does this reflect who we say we are?" The interview ran 90 minutes. When it ended, Dalton sat in Amara's apartment, drained and electric. The board met 3 days later in executive session. Dr. Langford placed 3 folders on the table. Our finalists: Dr. Chen from Exeter, Dr. Morrison from Dalton School, and Dr. Freeman. Wendell frowned. "Freeman's credentials are impressive, but is anyone concerned about the optics? He's been a custodian here for 15 years. Which means he knows the institution better than anyone," Langford said. "He's seen what works, what fails, and what we pretend not to notice. That's not a liability, that's insight." Jennifer Sue nodded. "His research is exactly what we need. His interview was the strongest I've seen in 20 years on this board." "But the faculty," another member started, "the reaction when they find out." "We asked for transformation," Langford interrupted. Her voice was steel. "We said we wanted someone who could bring Whitmore into the 21st century. We have that person. The question is whether we have the courage to hire him." Silence. "All in favor?" 6 hands rose. Unanimous. Langford sealed the decision in a confidential envelope and scheduled the announcement. Friday afternoon, 3:47 p.m., the email arrived in every faculty and staff inbox. "All faculty and staff required to attend Monday assembly, 8 o'clock a.m., main auditorium. New principal will be introduced. Attendance mandatory." In the faculty lounge, speculation exploded. In the boiler room, Luther looked at Dalton with something between fear and hope. In her apartment, Amara screamed and called her father, crying. And in the custodial closet on the 3rd floor, Dalton Freeman hung up his navy blue uniform for the last time. Monday morning, 7:43 a.m. Dalton Freeman's car pulled into Whitmore Academy's front parking lot, not the service lot behind the maintenance building where he'd parked for 15 years, but the visitor spaces near the main entrance, the ones reserved for parents and dignitaries. He sat for a moment, hands on the steering wheel, breathing. The navy suit jacket hung perfectly on his shoulders. Luther had helped him pick it out last week, insisting on tailored instead of off the rack. "You walk in there looking like you belong," Luther had said, "because you do." Dalton gathered his leather briefcase, genuine leather, not the vinyl knockoff he'd carried to night classes, and stepped out. The morning air tasted different, or maybe he was just tasting it for the first time. The front doors, brass fixtures polished to mirrors, flanked by stone columns bearing the school's founding date, 1887. He'd cleaned these doors thousands of times, always from the outside, always before dawn. Now he walked toward them in full daylight. Students clustered near the entrance, scrolling phones, clutching coffee cups. They glanced up as he approached, then parted without knowing why. Something in his walk, his carriage, triggered automatic deference. He was through the doors before anyone processed what they'd seen. Inside, the main hallway stretched before him, polished hardwood floors. He knew every inch, every scuff mark, every place where the finish wore thin. But he'd never walked them like this. Not in the center, not with his head up. Kyle Drummond stood near the trophy case, lacrosse stick slung over his shoulder, holding court with 3 teammates. He saw Dalton and froze mid-sentence. "Yo, why is the janitor wearing a suit?" His friends turned, stared. One pulled out his phone. Dalton kept walking, didn't pause, didn't acknowledge, just moved past them with the steady purpose of someone who had somewhere to be. Behind him, Kyle's voice. "Did you see that? What the hell?" The auditorium doors stood open. Faculty filed in, coffee cups in hand, chatting about weekend plans and upcoming parent conferences. Dalton could see them from the hallway. Gwen Hartley in her usual corner seat, marking up a manuscript with red pen. Bryce Collingham near the front, checking his watch impatiently. Vanessa Okafor sitting alone in the middle section, looking tired. None of them had seen him yet. Dalton moved to the backstage entrance, the one performers used, not the service corridor. He found Dr. Langford waiting in the wings, elegant in a charcoal suit, her white hair styled perfectly. "Ready?" she asked. "I've been ready for 15 years. She squeezed his shoulder. "Then let's do this." In the auditorium, the lights dimmed. Faculty conversations tapered to whispers. Students filled the back rows, mandated attendance creating a restless energy. Dr. Langford walked onto the stage. The room quieted. "Good morning. Thank you all for being here. Today marks a significant moment in Whitmore Academy's history. After an extensive national search, the board has unanimously selected our new principal." Bryce leaned forward, jaw tight. He'd been lobbying board members for weeks, certain the decision would be reversed. "Our new principal," Langford continued, "holds a doctorate in education from Columbia University. He's published extensively on institutional transformation and equity in elite education. His previous position saw student achievement gaps close by 40% in 3 years. He's been recognized nationally for innovative programming that honors both academic rigor and human dignity." Faculty exchanged glances. Those credentials were impressive. Murmurs of approval rippled through the room. "I'm honored to introduce Dr. Dalton Freeman." Langford stepped aside. Dalton walked onto the stage. 3 seconds of absolute silence. Then someone gasped. A sharp intake of breath that carried. Kyle Drummond in the back row said too loudly, "Holy shit, that's—" Recognition spread like ignition, face after face registering shock, confusion, disbelief. Phones emerged. Students started frantically Googling. Vanessa Okafor's hand flew to her mouth. Tears spilled down her cheeks immediately, silently. She made no move to wipe them away. Bryce Collingham's face drained of color. Actually drained. His hands gripped the armrests, knuckles white. Gwen Hartley looked like she might be sick. Her red pen clattered to the floor. In the back row, standing against the wall with the other custodial staff, Luther Sykes allowed himself the smallest nod. His eyes were wet, but his jaw was set, proud. The room erupted in whispers. Phones tilted, typing frantically. The tick-tock notification sound started within seconds, that distinctive chime multiplying across the auditorium. Dalton stood at the podium, waiting, not rushing, letting them process. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady, clear, the voice of someone who'd spent 15 years learning to choose his words carefully. "Good morning. I know this institution intimately. I know its potential and its failings. I know what it looks like when students are inspired and when they're going through motions. I know which policies serve education and which serve tradition for tradition's sake. I know where resources go and where they don't. I know who gets seen and who becomes invisible." He paused, made eye contact with Vanessa, with Luther, with students in the back filming him. "I'm here to realize Whitmore's potential and address its failings. I'm here to ensure every person in this building, faculty, staff, student, is seen, valued, and held to the highest standard. Not the standard we claim to have, the standard we actually practice." Another pause. The room was absolutely silent now, except for the soft clicking of phone cameras. "Change is uncomfortable. It reveals things we've chosen not to examine. But discomfort is not harm. Discomfort is growth. And this institution needs to grow." He closed the folder in front of him, though he hadn't looked at it once. My door will be open, literally. I don't believe in closed-door leadership. If you have questions, concerns, or ideas, I want to hear them. We're going to build something here, together, and we're going to do it right. The applause started with Vanessa, then Luther, then spread unevenly through the room, some enthusiastic, some hesitant, some sitting with arms crossed, not clapping at all. Dalton walked off stage. The assembly ended. Chaos. Faculty emergency meeting called immediately. Students clustered in hallways, phones out, voices overlapping. Did you see his face? Google him. His credentials are insane. My mom is going to lose her mind. Parents started calling the main office within minutes. Bryce Collingham stormed toward the administrative wing, face purple with rage. He burst into Dr. Langford's office without knocking. You hired the janitor? The janitor? Langford looked up from her computer, expression serene. We hired the most qualified candidate. Dr. Freeman's credentials speak for themselves. His credentials? Patricia, he pushed a mop for 15 years. He's exactly who this institution needs, she interrupted. The board was unanimous, Bryce. The decision is final. At 4:47 p.m., every faculty member's inbox chimed simultaneously. The email was brief. All faculty report to conference room tomorrow, 8 a.m. Mandatory, no exceptions. Dr. Freeman. Gwen Hartley stared at her screen, hand shaking. The message was clear. This was not ceremonial. Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. The conference room felt smaller than it should have. 27 faculty members packed into chairs arranged in rigid rows. The air smelled like stale coffee and anxiety. Dalton stood at the front, laptop connected to the projector, wearing a charcoal suit that fit like armor. He didn't smile. Good morning. Thank you for being on time. His voice carried the same quiet authority from the assembly, but there was something harder underneath. We're going to review some data this morning. I want you to understand why certain changes are non-negotiable. He clicked. The first slide appeared. Disciplinary actions, 2009-2004. Racial disparities. The numbers told their own story. Black students were suspended at 4 times the rate of white students for identical infractions. Latino students received harsher punishments for dress code violations. The data was color-coded, undeniable, devastating. Vanessa Okafor covered her mouth. Gwen Hartley shifted in her seat, face pale. These aren't opinions, Dalton continued. These are facts. Documented patterns of bias in how we enforce rules, assign grades, recommend students for honors programs. It's systemic, it's measurable, and it ends now. Next slide. Faculty hiring practices, demographics versus student body. 87% white faculty, 42% students of color. The gap was a chasm. We claim to prepare students for a diverse world, Dalton said, but we've built a monoculture. That changes starting with our next hiring cycle. We'll be conducting an audit of all hiring decisions from the past decade. Bryce Collingham's chair scraped back. He stood, face flushed. This is absurd. You can't just waltz in here and accuse us of... Mr. Collingham, Dalton's voice didn't rise. It sharpened. This is not a debate. These are findings from an independent analysis commissioned by the board. If you'd like to review the methodology, I have the full report, but this meeting will continue. You have no right to... I have every right. The board granted me full authority over academic and disciplinary policy. You're welcome to verify that with Dr. Langford. Dalton's eyes were steady. Please, sit down. The silence that followed was electric. Bryce remained standing for 3 long seconds, then dropped into his chair with barely controlled fury. Dalton continued. Mandatory anti-bias training begins Friday. All faculty, no exceptions. It's not optional. It's not punitive. It's necessary. The meeting ended at 9:15. Nobody lingered. Vanessa caught Dalton in the hallway outside his office. Dr. Freeman, do you have a moment? He gestured her inside. She sat across from his desk, hands trembling in her lap. I need to apologize, her voice cracked. For years I watched them treat you like you were invisible, like you were nothing, and I said nothing. I told myself I couldn't risk my job, that I had student loans, that I was one of only 3 black teachers, and if I spoke up they'd find a reason to let me go, but those are excuses. I'm so sorry. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Dalton handed her a tissue from the box he'd placed on his desk that morning. He'd known this conversation was coming. "Vanessa, I understand why you stayed silent. The system was designed to isolate us, to make resistance feel impossible." He leaned forward. "But you're here now, and now you have a choice. Help me build something better." She nodded, wiping her eyes. "Whatever you need." Gwen Hartley arrived at 2 p.m., shoulders squared, ready with explanations. Dalton could see her defenses from across the room. "I want you to understand, Dr. Freeman, that I never intended any harm. My comments were never personal. I simply didn't realize. I didn't know you were pursuing your education. And if I had known—" "Ms. Hartley." He cut through her words like scissors through paper. "Intent doesn't erase impact. You made jokes about my intelligence in front of students. You treated me like I was intellectually inferior because I held a mop. That wasn't accidental. That was a choice." Her mouth opened, closed. You thought what you'd been conditioned to think, that the work someone does defines their worth. That's what we're dismantling here." He paused. "I'm not interested in punishment. I'm interested in change. The question is whether you're capable of it." She left without answering. Wednesday afternoon, Dalton gathered the custodial staff in the main conference room, not the basement break room where they usually met, the same room where faculty gathered. "Luther Sykes has worked here for 40 years, Dalton announced. "He trained me. He knows this institution better than anyone. Effective immediately, he's Director of Facilities Management, with a 30% salary increase and a seat at all operational meetings." Luther's eyes widened. The other custodians erupted in applause. For the first time in decades, someone was watching them be honored. Thursday's student assembly was packed. Dalton stood without notes. Excellence isn't just about test scores or college admissions. It's about character, how you treat people when they can't do anything for you, the custodian cleaning your classroom, the cafeteria worker serving your lunch. That's where your character shows. In the back row, Kyle Drummond muttered to his friends, "This is bullshit. He's just the janitor." 3 students turned to stare at him. The shift was already happening. Friday morning, Dalton's inbox chimed. An email forwarded from Dr. Langford, the original sender, Bryce Collingham, sent to the entire school board. Subject: concerns regarding Dr. Freeman's overreach. The email detailed complaints about divisive policies, reverse discrimination, and unqualified leadership making radical changes without proper consultation. Dr. Langford's note was brief. "Thought you should see this. Board voted 7-1 to ignore it. You have our full support." Dalton read it twice, then filed it away. That night, 10 p.m., he was still in his office reviewing curriculum proposals when Amara knocked. She'd driven up from campus, let herself in with the key he'd given her years ago. "Dad, are you okay? I saw the stuff online. People are saying things—" He looked up, smiled for the first time that week. "I'm better than okay. I'm free." She hugged him, and he held his daughter in the office that used to belong to the people who'd called him stupid. Saturday morning, the Whitmore Gazette published a letter to the editor, anonymous. The language was careful, coded, calculated. Recent administrative changes raise questions about whether someone with Dr. Freeman's background is appropriate for leading an institution of Whitmore's caliber. His radical agenda threatens the traditions that have made this school exceptional. The racism was obvious to anyone paying attention. The battle was just beginning. The emergency parent meeting was scheduled for Tuesday evening, but by Monday afternoon, Dalton knew it would be packed. The email chain had leaked. Someone forwarded it to him, 37 parents demanding answers about divisive curriculum changes and lowering academic standards. The language was careful, polished, lawyered. But Dalton had cleaned enough offices, emptied enough trash cans to know what people really meant. The library was standing room only. 70 parents, maybe 80. Dalton recognized most of them. The Drummonds, third row center. The Ashfords, who'd hosted that garden party where he'd served drinks and listened to them joke about how much English does a janitor really need. The Wexlers, whose son had once dumped an entire cafeteria tray on the floor and said, "That's what you're here for, right?" Bryce stood near the back, not officially present but definitely orchestrating. Dalton watched him lean close to Margaret Chen, whisper something that made her nod sharply. Move to Harrison Whitfield, touch his shoulder, gesture toward the front, building consensus without fingerprints. Thank you for coming, Dr. Langford began from the podium. We're here to address concerns about recent policy changes. We're here because this school is being hijacked, Margaret interrupted, standing. Anti-bias training isn't education, it's indoctrination. Our children don't need to be made to feel guilty for being successful. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. My daughter came home crying, another parent called out. Said her history teacher told her the curriculum has been whitewashed. She's 11 years old. Why are we making everything about race? Dalton sat at the front table, hands folded, listening. Dr. Langford glanced at him, but he shook his head slightly. Not yet. The complaints accelerated. Scholarship fund was charity theater. New hiring practices were reverse discrimination. The mandatory training was hostile work environment. Someone mentioned property values. Someone else brought up legacy admissions being under attack. Then Harrison Whitfield stood, major donor, board member emeritus, old money that predated the Civil War. I think we all know what's really happening here. Dr. Freeman has a personal agenda. He's pursuing a vendetta against this institution, and frankly, I question whether someone with his background. His doctorate is from Columbia, Dr. Langford said sharply. His credentials are... There are questions. Harrison's voice was ice. The Sentinel published concerns about online degree programs. The Sentinel published a lie, Vanessa Okafor said from the side of the room, standing. Dr. Freeman's doctorate is from a fully accredited program. The Sentinel retracted that story this morning. Some of you just haven't seen it yet. Silence. Then the murmuring started again, uglier now. That night, Dalton was locking his office when his phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer. The voice on the voicemail was distorted, mechanical. You think you can come back here and disrespect us? You're still just a nigger with a mop. We know where you live. We know where your daughter goes to school. His hand shook as he lowered the phone. Luther found him 20 minutes later, still sitting at his desk, staring at nothing. The older man didn't ask questions, just pulled up a chair and sat. They'd worked together for 15 years. Some things didn't need words. You want me to stay? Luther finally asked. No, I'm okay. That's not what I asked. Dalton looked at his friend. Yeah, stay. The board meeting Thursday night was worse. Formal complaints had been filed. 6 parents demanded Dalton's removal. 12 more wanted policy reversals. The room was packed with press, local news, education bloggers, conservative outlets that had been covering the controversy for 3 days. The question before this board, Harrison said, his voice carrying weight that money buys, is whether we can afford to let personal grievances dictate institutional policy. Dr. Freeman may have legitimate complaints about his treatment years ago, but that doesn't qualify him to dismantle everything this school has built. Everything this school has built, Dalton said quietly standing, is crumbling. Enrollment is down 18% in 5 years. Faculty retention is abysmal. Student satisfaction surveys are worse. You hired me because the old methods were failing. Now you're upset that I'm actually changing them. You're making it about race when it should be about excellence, Margaret said. Dalton smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. You're not afraid I'll lower standards. You're afraid I'll apply them equally. The room went still. For 15 years, I watched students cheat on exams and get warnings while scholarship kids got expelled for the same offense. I watched white teachers get second chances while teachers of color got one-strike policies. I watched legacy students skate through with C averages while brilliant kids from public schools got rejected for not being Whitmore material. You want to talk about standards? Let's talk about which students you actually hold to them. 3 parents stood and walked out. Margaret was one of them, but 50 others stayed seated, and some of them looked uncomfortable now, like they were hearing something they'd been trying not to know. The board voted 20 minutes later, 6-1 in Dalton's favor. Harrison's was the only dissent. Friday morning, an envelope appeared on Dalton's desk, no return address. Inside, 3 pages of handwriting, Gwen Hartley's distinctive script. Dr. Freeman, it began. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. For 6 years, I made jokes about your intelligence. I called you slow. I laughed when others did worse. I told myself I was harmless, that I was one of the good ones. I was wrong. I was cruel. I participated in a system designed to make you invisible, and I did it while priding myself on my progressive values. I'm ashamed. I'm sorry. I'm trying to be better. That's all I can offer. Gwen. Dalton read it twice, then filed it carefully in his desk drawer. That afternoon, Kyle's father stormed past his assistant without knocking. Richard Drummond, hedge fund manager, Whitmore class of '89, face red with rage. "My son's future is being destroyed by your sensitivity crusade," he snarled. One comment. One stupid teenage mistake and you want to ruin his life? Dalton looked up calmly. Your son called another student a racial slur in front of his entire class. That's not a mistake. That's a choice. Would you like me to lower my standards for him? Richard's jaw worked. You can't. I can. I did. Kyle is suspended for 3 days and required to complete restorative justice sessions before returning. Those are the consequences, the same ones any student would face. We'll sue. That's your right. Richard turned to leave, then spun back. You know what? Fine. Enjoy your little revenge. But that video that just dropped, the one of Bryce from 8 years ago, that was me. I leaked it. Because I'm done watching this place become something I don't recognize. He slammed the door. Dalton sat very still. Then he pulled out his phone and searched. The video was everywhere. Bryce at a donor dinner, drunk, laughing. You know why we keep the help around? Someone's got to clean up after the real people. Laughter from off camera. Then worse, much worse. The view count was already at 200,000. The media trucks arrived before sunrise, satellite dishes sprouting like metal flowers across Whitmore's manicured lawn. Dalton parked in his designated spot, principal's space, brass nameplate gleaming, and watched reporters check their cameras, producers bark into headsets. The video had hit 3 million views overnight. Inside, the emergency board meeting felt like a trial. Bryce sat at the far end of the table, tie loosened, hair disheveled for the first time in anyone's memory. This is character assassination, he said, voice hoarse. Dalton orchestrated this. He's had it planned from day one. Dr. Langford's expression didn't shift. Do you deny the content of the video? I was drunk. It was 8 years ago. Answer the question. Bryce's silence filled the room like smoke. The board voted unanimously for administrative leave pending investigation. As he gathered his briefcase, Bryce locked eyes with Dalton. I hope this was worth it. Dalton said nothing. There was nothing to say. An hour later, Vanessa knocked on his office door. She stood in the threshold, hands trembling slightly. I need to tell you something. She closed the door. I leaked the video. I recorded it at that donor dinner 8 years ago. I've had it on my phone this whole time, and I never did anything with it because I was terrified. Terrified of losing my job, of being labeled a troublemaker, of becoming invisible like they made you invisible. Her voice cracked. I should have done it years ago. I'm sorry. Dalton stood, moved around his desk. You did it when you were ready. That's what matters. Is it? How many students did he hurt in those 8 years while I stayed quiet? You can't carry that alone. None of us can. By midday, the students were organizing. It started with the Black Student Union, then spread to other affinity groups, then to allies, until nearly 200 students walked out of class and gathered on the front lawn. Kyle Drummond stood at the edge of the crowd, hands in his pockets, face uncertain. When the chant started, "Stand with Freeman," his lips moved silently along. The alumni letter arrived that evening, 237 signatures, 12 single-spaced pages, story after story. A black graduate from 1998 describing how teachers assumed he was recruited for athletics, not academics. A Latinx student from 2005 recounting how she was accused of cheating when her test scores were too high. An Asian American alumnus from 2010 sharing how his name was mispronounced for 4 years despite multiple corrections. The documentation was devastating, comprehensive, undeniable. Dalton held a press conference on the front steps. Cameras from CNN, MSNBC, local affiliates crowded the semicircle. This isn't about one video or one man, he said, voice steady. It's about systems that make certain people invisible while elevating others. It's about who we decide deserves dignity and who we treat as disposable. Whitmore Academy failed in that regard. But failure isn't permanent. Change is possible. That's what we're proving here." A reporter shouted, "Are you satisfied with Bryce Collingham's suspension?" "I'm not interested in satisfaction. I'm interested in transformation." That night, Gwen Hartley posted a statement on the school website. "For 15 years, I participated in the systematic dehumanization of a colleague. I made jokes about his intelligence. I treated him as part of the furniture. I told myself I was harmless because others were worse. I was wrong. I was cruel. I cannot undo the harm, but I can dedicate myself to ensuring it doesn't continue. I'm asking Dr. Freeman to allow me to help with curriculum reform, to put action behind these words. I don't deserve forgiveness. I'm asking for the chance to earn something better than forgiveness, useful change." Dalton read it twice, then sent her a meeting request. The local paper ran Luther's interview under the headline, "The Man Who Watched." Luther's words were simple, devastating. "I watched them treat him like he was nothing for 15 years. They'd walk past him like he was a ghost, make him clean up their messes on his hands and knees, laugh about him in the break room, and the whole time he was studying, reading, becoming something they couldn't imagine because they refused to see him at all. He never stopped being something. They just never bothered to look." The interview went viral. National outlets started calling. Good Morning America, The Atlantic, NPR. Amara helped him prepare, coaching him on sound bites, reminding him to breathe. Kyle appeared at his office door on Friday afternoon. "Can I talk to you?" Dalton gestured to the chair. Kyle sat, bouncing his knee, not meeting his eyes. "I don't understand something," Kyle said finally. "Why aren't you angrier? If people treated me the way they treated you, I'd want to destroy them." Dalton leaned back. "You think I'm not angry? You don't act like it." Anger would give them exactly what they want, proof that I'm unfit, proof that I'm vindictive, proof that elevating someone like me was a mistake. He paused. Excellence is the only revenge worth having, building something better than what they created. That's the anger that matters. Kyle was quiet for a long moment. "I said something terrible to Marcus, the scholarship kid. I didn't think about it. I just said it because that's what guys say, you know. But I've been thinking about what you said, about choices versus mistakes." He looked up. "I want to apologize to him. Actually, apologize, not the bullshit version my dad told me to do." "Then do it. And mean it." After Kyle left, Dalton stood at his window watching students cross the quad. His phone buzzed with another interview request. He'd agreed to give a speech at Monday's assembly. The entire school would be there. Parents, faculty, students, media, everyone watching to see what he'd say, how he'd say it, whether he'd weaponize his pain or transcend it. He'd spent 15 years invisible. Monday, everyone would see him. The auditorium hadn't held this many bodies since the 1987 championship game. Every seat filled, students sitting in aisles, faculty standing along walls, parents pressed against the back doors. The live stream counter climbed past 10,000 viewers in the first 5 minutes. Dalton stood backstage, listening to Dr. Langford's introduction. His hands were steady. He'd written nothing down. This story lived in his bones. When he walked into the light, the murmur died. "I'm going to tell you a story," he began, his voice carrying without strain, "about a man who was invisible for 15 years. He described arriving at Whitmore in 2008, a single father with a 9th-grade education and a 6-year-old daughter who needed health insurance. He described the first time a teacher walked past him without acknowledgement, how he assumed it was an accident until it happened again and again, how stupid became his unofficial title, how students learned to dismiss him by watching their teachers do it first. The auditorium was silent except for his voice. "There was a bathroom on the 3rd floor, Dalton said. One of the teachers made a habit of leaving his coffee cup on the floor by the toilet, every single day, not on the counter, on the floor. When I asked him once if he could use the trash can, he looked at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. He said, 'What else are you here for?'" Vanessa's hand covered her mouth. She was crying. Dalton described the boiler room where he studied after his shift ended at midnight, the GED prep books hidden in his locker, the community college applications he filled out during lunch breaks, eating sandwiches while conjugating verbs. The day he received his acceptance letter and couldn't tell a soul at work because hope was dangerous here. Admitting ambition meant inviting ridicule. I earned my bachelor's degree in 2014, he said. Took me 6 years of night classes. I walked across that stage with my daughter in the audience, and on Monday morning I came back here and someone asked me to unclog a toilet. I said yes, sir, and did it, because that was my job, but I was also a college graduate. Both things were true. The camera swept across student faces. Shock, confusion, shame. In 2018, I earned my master's in educational leadership. In 2022, I completed my doctorate. His voice didn't waver. The day I defended my dissertation, I came to work that night and cleaned the gymnasium after a basketball game. I found a half-eaten pizza under the bleachers and beer bottles in the locker room, and I thought about how nobody here knew that earlier that day a committee of professors had called me Dr. Freeman. Luther was nodding, his jaw tight, recognition in his eyes. I'm telling you this not for pity, Dalton said, his voice rising. I'm telling you because I wasn't unique. I was just visible enough to be mocked and invisible enough to be ignored. And that's what we do to service workers every single day. We see them just enough to use them and not enough to recognize their humanity. He paused, letting the words settle. But this isn't about me. It's about what we choose to build next. He looked directly at the student section. You inherited a culture that taught you some people matter and some people don't. You learned to rank human worth by job title, by skin color, by whose parents donated the library wing. That wasn't your fault. But what you do now, that's your choice. His voice softened. You can inherit cruelty or you can create something better. You can maintain the systems that elevated some of you by crushing others, or you can build something worth being proud of. The applause started in the back, a single person, then spread like wildfire. Students rising, faculty standing, a standing ovation that lasted 2 minutes. But the camera caught the ones who remained seated, a cluster of older alumni, arms crossed, 3 parents near the exit, faces hard. Kyle stood slowly, whispering to his friend, "My dad's not gonna like this." Gwen stood with tears streaming, hands shaking as she clapped. Afterward, the line stretched down the hallway, students wanting to apologize for things they'd never said directly but had aloud, teachers asking how to do better, parents thanking him for teaching their children what they'd failed to. Vanessa hugged him without words. Luther gripped his shoulder. "You did it, Doc." At home, Bryce watched the live stream on his laptop. When Dalton finished speaking, when the ovation began, Bryce closed the computer. He opened his email and began typing his resignation, effective immediately. Then he opened a second email, this one to the State Education Board, attaching every piece of documentation he could weaponize. If his world was ending, Whitmore's would too. 6 months later, the State Education Board dismissed Bryce Collingham's complaint in 4 pages of clinical language. Dr. Freeman's credentials were impeccable. His hiring followed proper procedures. The allegations appeared retaliatory in nature. Bryce's name disappeared from committee rosters. Board memberships quietly revoked. The country club stopped returning his calls. He told people he was focusing on family, but his children had stopped visiting. At Whitmore, the changes ran deeper than policy memos. Ms. Chen taught AP Literature now, her syllabus including Toni Morrison and James Baldwin alongside the usual canon. In the science wing, Dr. Okonkwo's physics class was 60% students of color, twice last year's number. The disciplinary data told its own story. Suspensions down 4%, with racial disparities nearly eliminated. Luther Sykes led the monthly staff meeting in the conference room, not the basement. The custodial team had business cards now, proper titles, health insurance that actually covered things. Equipment request approved, Luther announced, reading from the agenda Dalton had taught him to prepare. New floor buffers arrive Tuesday, and I want everyone using the main break room. That's not a suggestion. Across campus, Gwen Hartley presented her curriculum reforms to administrators from 3 neighboring districts. Her voice was steadier than it used to be, less performative. I spent 20 years teaching students to analyze power structures in literature, she said, while participating in them without question. The cognitive dissonance was, she paused, comfortable. That's the problem. Cruelty becomes comfortable when it serves us. The visiting principals took notes. One asked if she'd consult on their diversity initiative. Only if you're serious, Gwen said. Performative change is worse than no change. In the assistant principal's office, Vanessa Okafor mentored 2 new teachers of color through their first semester challenges. She'd helped recruit them, interviewed them, promised them something she'd never had, backup. You don't have to smile through microaggressions, she told them. Document everything and know that when you speak up, someone will listen. The graduation ceremony drew twice the usual crowd. Kyle Drummond gave the senior address, his lacrosse captain confidence replaced by something harder earned. I need to apologize, he said, gripping the podium. For 4 years, I watched adults treat service workers like they were invisible, and I learned from that. I learned that some people mattered and some people didn't. His voice cracked. Dr. Freeman taught me I was wrong, that those lessons were poison. I don't know if I can undo the damage, but I can refuse to pass it on. The standing ovation lasted 3 minutes. In the front row, his parents stood last, faces unreadable. The national coverage never quite stopped. The janitor who became principal sparked investigations at schools across the country. Service worker unions cited Dalton's story in contract negotiations. 3 states introduced bills protecting custodial staff from workplace harassment. Dalton declined most speaking requests. My work is here, he told a TED Talk producer. These students need consistency, not a principal who's always on a plane. On a Tuesday afternoon, Amara found him at his office window, watching the quad. Students of every background sprawled on the grass, studying together, laughing together. The lacrosse team helped the theater kids move set pieces. Was it worth it? She asked quietly. All those years? Dalton watched a custodian walk through the main entrance, waving to students who waved back, calling him by name. Every single day of it. Across town, Bryce sat in his father's study, scrolling through news articles about Whitmore's success, record enrollment, national recognition, Dalton's face on the cover of Education Weekly. He couldn't stop reading, couldn't look away from everything he'd lost. At Whitmore, Dalton's office door stood open, as it always did. Students dropped by between classes. Teachers consulted him on lesson plans. Luther stopped in to complain about the heating system, and they solved it together. The nameplate gleamed. Dalton Freeman, principal. The door would never close.